Buffer overflows, or dissecting the exploit. So we talked about in gaining access, so there's lots of different ways to gain access, and one of the most common is a buffer overflow. Now, what exactly is a buffer overflow? That's what we're going to cover in this lecture. So, first let's talk about what a buffer is. A buffer is just a temporary storage area that a program uses to store its data. So, for instance, we might have something like a phone number we want to remember, 555-1234. Now, if I'm a computer program, I have to constantly be remembering that, or I need to put it someplace to store it, and that's where a buffer comes in. So let's take an example of a buffer A. It's an 8-bit buffer. It's got 8 blocks for us to put information in. Can I put the number 555-1234 in an 8-bit buffer? Well, sure I can, because I can put 555-1234 and it fits perfectly inside an 8-bit buffer. What happens, though, with a buffer overflow is a program puts more data into the buffer than the buffer can hold. In our example, instead of using a regular 7-digit phone number, what if I end up using the area code as well? Well, now, instead of being able to put the entire number in A, the buffer I was looking at, it's going to overflow into B. And so you'll see it goes 210-555-1234. So when I read from buffer A, I'm actually getting 210-555-. And now when I go for my second program to run buffer B, I'm actually getting 1234, and I don't understand what that information is from. And that's all a buffer overflow does, is it actually goes beyond what is allowed to be stored in a single area. So how does the exploit work? Well, the stack is a reserved area of memory where the program saves the return address when a call instruction is received. So as you can see here, we have buffer 2 with a local variable 2, and then we have our shellcode that we've put in there. And then we put a new pointer to the shellcode, and that might be where the information used to be. So when the computer goes back there, it's going to now see the return pointer that was overwritten and point to my shellcode. So as we walk through this will make a little bit more sense. The stack is organized in a first in, last out structure. The first thing that's placed in the stack is the last thing that comes out of the stack. So what happens is the attacker places too much information on the stack, and they can change the value of the return pointer to carry out their attack. So when you go to the new pointer, it's actually going to point to my shellcode and not to the internet browser or to Microsoft Word. So the attacker's code is placed inside the buffer, and the code that's used to run the commands or execute a series of instructions, again that shellcode, is then going to be used. Buffer overflows are a complex topic. We don't need to understand the nitty-gritties of how to actually develop them, but the fact is that many of the techniques that we use inside Metasploit and Metasploit framework are buffer overflow exploits. And so you're going to be using them a lot. This is just to give you an idea of how they work. And the idea is that as you've put additional information into the memory, when the computer hits that part, it's going to slide into it, go to that new pointer, and run that shellcode. So, again, where do buffer overflows fall in the grand scheme of things? Usually we're going to use them in our gaining access phase. This is an exploit, so we're going to exploit a vulnerability using a buffer overflow. Buffer overflows are able to be done because of poorly written software. So let's take an example of how this works and see if it makes it a little bit clearer. So there's a wonderful website out there called Over the Wire, and it's got a lot of different hacking challenges. It's a live environment where you can connect via an SSH connection, a secure shell connection, to attempt various binary exploitation challenges, including buffer overflows. Now, this is beyond the scope of this class. It's pretty challenging, but as you start working through and developing your skill set, you'll want to go back to this site and play with it because there's a lot of great challenges there that can really help bring your technical ability up. Now, one of the ones we're going to use here to show the buffer overflow is one in the Narnia series of exercises at Over the Wire. So here's a copy of what the code looks like. This is the actual software code. It's a very short code, less than 20 lines. Now this is a C program they're writing. So I'm going to walk through it with you, so if you don't understand C, that's just fine. You'll be able to follow along, I promise. So don't worry too much about the first two, the includes. That's just saying, here's how I can talk to the computer and receive information, input, output. So inside the main program, we have long value. That's a variable. And they're setting that variable initially to 0x41414141, which is a hexadecimal value. It's just giving us an initial value to start with. Our goal in this program is we want to be able to change the value from x41414141 to x deadbeef. We're going to set up a buffer of 20 characters. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is print to the screen, correct value from 41414141 to deadbeef. They're going to print, here's your chance, and then they're going to scanf. Scanf just means input, so it's waiting for an input. And it's going to allow us to input from the keyboard, and it's going to input that into the buffer. Now, how big is that buffer again? That's right, we said it was only 20. So if we overflow that buffer, we can actually get it to do things that we want. So the next thing we're going to do is print out what the buffer is. So whatever we typed and hit enter, it's going to print back to us and give us the value inside hex. And so you'll see that there. So if the value that we set was dead beef, then we're going to get back system bin/sh, which is a shell. So that's going to be our payload. Our payload is we're going to receive the command prompt from Linux. Otherwise, we're going to get an answer of way off, you messed up, you didn't do it right, and the program's going to terminate. It's a pretty simple program. So let's see how that works in the real world. So if you thought this was an interesting topic and you want to learn more about it, I recommend looking at the Shellcoder's Handbook, Hacking the Art of Exploitation, or the Hacker's Playbook 2. All three of these books are great resources. They'll really help you hone the skills that you'll need to work on binary exploitation. Again, it's way beyond the scope of this class to teach you how to really dig in deep into this. This is just to give you a quick overview so you understand what a buffer overflow is and just see what that example looks like.